Good morning, everyone, or actually good evening. You don't know on internet. I messed up with my time zones. This is Piero Giorgio. I'm the author of Survive the Economic Collapse and other books. I am very happy to have with us today Tough Love from New Zealand. Good morning or good evening.
Hello, Piero, from the exact other side of the world. Good
Isn't
morning.
technology wonderful? So,
Yes,
after a few attempts into getting time zone right, we finally can speak.
my
Um,
pleasure. My pleasure.
Indeed, also for me, and a lot of our of my listeners may not know you. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do and why you're in New Zealand?
I came to New Zealand when I was 2 years old. My father was British, and my mother is a Kiwi. She's a New Zealander. So I've been living here most of my life, though I could claim European citizenship before Brexit happened. Now I can claim British citizenship. And I have been writing a blog since not too long, since last year, that has a Eurocentric feel to it. It's kind of all over the show. It ranges from art to to current events to race, and so that running that blog has put me in contact with a number of people, and I yeah, that I'm also an artist.
Hmm.
That's really my main thing, and at the moment I'm focused on bringing together avant-garde practice with, I guess you could say, alt-right concerns or nationalistic concerns or right-wing concerns, I guess you could say.
Hmm. In being for all your life in almost all your life in New Zealand, um, you probably can tell us a little bit more about how's this country to live in.
Well, I get a lot of people asking, actually. Usually when I communicate with people overseas, either they or somebody they know very well is thinking about moving to New Zealand, and I don't know how serious thinking about actually is, but it's definitely on people's consciousness. And we get a lot of Germans here. Germans seem to really like New Zealand, and I've sort of been speculating that when they're young, because we get a lot of young Germans coming over backpacking, or they come over and backpack and then they actually stay and live. And I think that they, God bless their souls, because of the way that Germany is
Hmm.
and its supposed history, they kind of look at the map of the world and they pick a point that's about as far away from anything as they could possibly choose, yet it's still got a first world civilization.
Hmm.
So I think that that's why it really appeals to people. It's the last stop before Antarctica, but it's got all of the trappings of a first world country.
And it's not South Africa.
It's not South Africa yet.
Aha. So why do you think Germans and many others? Because I have a lot of people who say, well, the last place we will be safe is going to be New Zealand. And your last comment is interesting. And how is immigration into New Zealand these days?
Well, New Zealand is one of the most multicultural countries in the West.
Hmm.
So we've kind of got a three-pronged attack happening. From my perspective, it's an attack. For European New Zealanders, it's an attack.
Hmm.
The first prong is the indigenous population, the native, well, native, I use that term loosely, the native Maori population. And when I say attack, I don't necessarily mean literally, but there's a lot of Marxist skewing that's gone on of our history.
Hmm.
and the media's right in on it. And so it's a lot like, I guess you could say, is in America, how racial tensions are actually just so agitated by the media and by the Marxist history that gets taught. And it's really hard to know how things would be if that whole template wasn't even there. What would relations be like? And when you look back in our history, it's rather interesting in terms of the different race relations between European and Maori. The second prong of the attack that we have is immigration in general. We get a lot coming from Pacific and Asia area. So we get a lot of Pacific Islanders coming in, and we get a lot of people from the Asia region. We get a small amount of sort of North African and Middle Eastern. It's pretty low.
Mm-hmm.
And the third prong of the attack is actually China, I think. And I don't know a lot about that, but it's definitely been a thing for a while in terms of buying up property and assets in New Zealand.
I see. Now, on the Marxist history point of view, it seems to me that when Marxists look at immigration, they always see that immigrants are very good and nice people, and the locals are violent, racist, and bad. Now, in the case of New Zealand, the white Europeans are immigrants, and the Maoris are the local, and indeed used to be brutal and violent and racist and would eat people. How did they turn this around on this case?
Well, it's the classic colonization, British colonization model. So we have come into a country, and the official narrative that everyone seems to believe is that it was a swindling of the native population to take their land, resources, and to eradicate their culture. You would think that if we wanted to do that outright, we would have just killed them off completely and just got on with it. But instead, we signed a treaty and we made them British citizens. So they were, as far as I know, the first native population of a country to be colonized, to be given full and equal rights as the British settlers or the European settlers that were there at the time. So the official narrative is one of eradication, and there's a lot of alternative history that gets published here, which paints a very different picture. Mm-hmm. And I can talk about different aspects of that depending on where you want to go with it.
Interestingly, so today the white Europeans are a majority, right, in New Zealand?
Yes, we're looking at 75% is the official figure at the moment. That's projected to drop by 10% in the next, I can't remember how long, 20 or 30 years, and the Asian population is meant to rise 10%. The problem with the 75% figure, from my point of view, is that includes people who identify with more than one ethnicity. So if you are half caste, for example, then you might have ticked Maori and European boxes. So with that 75% European, I don't know actually how much of that is people who identify with non-European. And for normal people, that's not a problem. It's like whatever. But anyone who kind of, keeps an eye on race knows that when somebody is mixed from obviously different skin colors, let's put it blatantly, then they over-identify with the non-white aspect of themselves. And so I don't consider that European. So, yeah.
Interesting. Why do you think that happened, by the way, on this identification with one half instead of the other?
Well, that's a huge question, but I think that it's got a lot to do with the narrative that's been projected since, let's say, the 1960s of the evil white person, the racist, the colonizer, the slaver, and the romanticization of the
Hmm.
non-white, of the indigenous person. And so people gravitate towards the more desirable side in their eyes, and also you can get status points too. There are many ways that you can get things in New Zealand, for example. If you have 1/19th Maori, for example, if you can show that, then you can get scholarships that aren't available to Europeans. You can get grants. There are courses where Europeans can't go on. So you might actually look European, but you might have 1/19th Maori, say, blood, and that
Hmm.
makes you eligible for benefits
Okay.
that that aren't available. Also, just general status benefits. It's the, I don't know how to put it, it's the cool factor. Hey bro, I've got flavor. I don't really know how to put it, but yeah, it's with this international hip hop culture, for
Hmm.
example, where it's cool to be a black rapper, for example.
Uh-huh.
It's that spiciness, it's that vibrancy, it's that culture that we don't seem to attribute to European.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether that's clear, but
Sure, I can understand that. Now, when people from Europe or US look at New Zealand, one of the first things they see is they see this haka war cry dance, and they look at this saying, and certainly I look at this, and with my children we do one, by the way, when we prepare for training, for physical training, we start with a small haka that we have invented. We completely invented it, and we see this as a, oh, how interesting! This is a sort of tribal bonding uh, thing. And suddenly I'm thinking, how is it that in New Zealand, with what you just described, is there a sense of strong nationhood or sentiment of being together, being Kiwi or New Zealanders? How does that work related to what you say of this interesting racial mixing that is going on?
in a word, no, there's not a cohesive identification. There was a kind of uh, DIY, toughen up, hard as nails farmer kind of thing, wearing flip flops and having barbecues, a little bit like the Australians, going on a caravan holiday around the island. There was that kind of culture, and there is still, but I don't know whether you classify it as a culture, and it has been a discussion that's been going on for a long time about what is New Zealand national identity, what is New Zealand culture, because we're a very young nation. It's been 170 years or something
Hmm.
since we were actually formally a nation. So it it it, it ties back into multiculturalism, I think, and the divisions that occur partly because of the media, partly because of the history that's been written, but also what you see, and this is happening more and more and more now, is that, for example, even just these very small minorities that are coming into New Zealand, like the North African and the Middle Eastern communities,
Hmm.
the Indian communities as well, they start to get onto local councils
Hmm.
and they start to advocate for their own community.
Of
And
course.
And of course, it's natural. And you hear things like, we aren't getting recognised for this, that, or the other, and so we need the government to do X, Y, Z in order to have our voice be recognised. And then they start to, there's kind of an erosion of, say, the police force, for example. So there was an article recently on the radio that was about African teenagers complaining that they're getting targeted by police officers
I wonder why.
Unfairly. They're saying just because I'm black and I wear baggy pants and hoodies and I look dodgy, it doesn't mean you should pull me over.
But is that I'm going to ask a very naive question, but is it the reason they get pulled over?
I would think that there are very legitimate reasons. I think that being black and wearing hoodies and baggy pants is a legitimate reason. But I would say that it's more also linked to crime statistics. Now,
okay, that's what police should police should be fair, right?
Yeah,
and to be fair means to be factual, and to be factual means looking at statistics and therefore your profile.
Yeah, and New Zealand police have been through the ringer so much recently that they've got to be really careful about what they do in terms of racial profiling, because it's been going on with the New Zealand Maori for a long time. And so to project this idea that there's a culture of racism within the New Zealand police, I think is a bit naive. But what the government are doing is it's this whole diversification of the police force now. So they're recognising that New Zealand is so multi-ethnic that they need to diversify the police force to reduce the chance of white racism and to increase empathy between police officers and, I would just say, criminals, to be honest. So yeah, it's a bit of a clusterfuck, really.
But however, if I look at the statistics of crime, New Zealand has very low crime statistics, especially outside of the big cities. Outside of Auckland, it seems there is almost zero. Outside of the big cities, there's almost zero criminality from the statistics I read. And Auckland itself is pretty low compared to big cities. Is that correct or?
Well, I mean, what's interesting is when you start to break those statistics down. And so, I mean, currently, I think Maori are 15% of the population, and in the prisons, they represent. I think men are sort of 50% of the prisons, and women are about 60%. And that's a whole discussion that's been going on for a very long time. And the official narrative is that the reason, and it's very similar to America, is that the reason that the prisons are so full disproportionately is because of systemic racism. It's the bias of the police officers. It's the bias of the judges doing the sentencing.
Okay.
And then it's the bias of the system itself, and that there's not sufficient rehabilitation of the inmates.
So you're a very westernized, politically correct system, at least in the large populated areas. If I from what you say, it's very similar to what we have everywhere else.
Exactly.
And I see that the economy is doing pretty well. I see plus 3% in the last 2 years, which is not bad compared to the rest of the world. And of course, people see, besides the economy, the people see great landscapes, a lot of empty space. I mean, the density of population is pretty low in New Zealand. Now,
Yes.
what for people who want to move to New Zealand, what are the opportunities and the hurdles to come in, as well as the disappointments that they may have, and I mean people from the U.S. or people from Europe, not Nigeria.
Well, one aspect that I find quite interesting that I don't actually know a lot about, but I think part of the reason that New Zealand appeals so much to the rest of the world is its clean green image.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what the tourism board promotes to the rest of the world. Is I think the brand was, I don't know whether it still is, 100% pure.
Mm-hmm.
But we have rather large issues with, for example, our fresh waterways. The story is, and again, I don't know, I'm sure there's lots of conspiracy theories out there that can debunk the official narrative, but that basically farming pollutes the fresh waterways, and we've got many, 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 many rivers here that you wouldn't want to eat fish from or swim in. So while New Zealand does have amazing empty natural resources, walks, hikes,
Mm-hmm.
whitewater rafting, bungee jumping, all those things, there is a flip side to that where things aren't quite as 100% pure as what the tourism board makes it out to be. In terms of lifestyle, I mean, I think that it depends on what you want, but because it's a small country, you can live seemingly in the middle of nowhere. You could probably still pick up something pretty cheap in terms of buying a house, depending on where you're prepared to live, but you can still be reasonably close to a major urban centre if you need to be. In terms of actually becoming a resident here, I don't actually know what kind of hurdles you have to jump through now. I have a friend who tried to go the other way and go to live in Britain, and she's a white middle class Kiwi girl, and she had an absolute hell of a time. And I sort of said to her, look, you need to tell them that you're a Syrian refugee.
Exactly.
And you'll be in,
Exactly.
You'll be in with a grin. So I don't actually know what it's like coming the other way. I mean, we're welcoming in refugees. We've got a pretty limited quota, but people are screaming for it to be increased. We're welcoming in non-whites from everywhere, so I don't know. Maybe it's the same for someone trying to get residency from outside. I'm not too sure.
I know that they have visas and resident permits for investors, or obviously people who have jobs. So I guess obviously one first step would be to find a company that wants to hire you, or perhaps if you're a bit wealthy. Setting up a company in New Zealand. That I know for sure. For
yes.
More, let's say, more middle class or let's say between brackets, normal people who may not be very wealthy. I don't know either. Okay. Now, as you know, I write about collapsing economies and collapsing systems. Should the global economy collapse? How do you see things evolving, and what do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of New Zealand in that context?
I was talking to a guy the other day, and he was saying, and again, I don't know that much about this, but he was saying that New Zealand is 75% renewable energy. We do have a lot of room, and depending on what your preferences are, the South Island is a pretty amazing place to go. Most of the vibrancy accumulates up the top of the North Island.
Mm-hmm.
And literally, as you go down into the colder regions, populations become less dense and they become more European. So again, depending on what you want, if you're wanting to escape vibrancy, you probably want to go further down towards Antarctica.
Yeah.
And you can still, as I say, you can still pick up some land pretty cheap. And if you wanted to be self-sufficient, then, or start a wee community, then opportunities are pretty good here. I think because of our DIY aesthetic that we hold dear to ourselves, that kind of thing is kind of celebrated down here.
Agriculture is still a very large part of the industry. 7%, according to the data I have, which is quite large. It's 7 times more than in the US in proportion of the population. And of course, you're famous for lambs, but I'm sure that you grow a lot of other food stuff, and I presume that you are autonomous in terms of food.
Kiwi fruit.
Of course.
just come and get your vitamin C.
Okay. Of course, lamb meat.
And plenty of lamb meat. We have a lot of export going on with that. Probably our best stuff's going offshore.
Yes, of course.
But what I've really been into is the small farms that you manage to find, usually when you're in a reasonably big district. These small producers of organic meat products. You'll get pork, beef, and lamb, and it's all sustainable, small production run, totally organic, pasture fed, whatever you want. And then they'll sell it through a local they'll either sell it at the gate or through a local butcher. And that's really my go-to, because I still don't know and trust what the more mainstream industry is feeding or injecting into their animals. Mm-hmm. in terms of say hormones, for example. I don't necessarily trust even the most prestigious mainstream meat products that are coming out. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you can still get raw milk if you get into the right network. There are so raw milk, raw butter, and organic pasture-fed meat.
Okay. I see also that, of course, GDP per capita is completely first world status. I see, however, that the debt of the government has increased immensely in the last 6 years. So you're welcome to the club of the highly indebted nations. Where does the government spend money to be in such a debt? Is it very socialist in welfare and things like that?
We have Prime Minister John Key, who has been in power for a few terms now, and he is a former investment banker guy. Mm-hmm. He worked in, I think it was Wall Street, or he worked for the Reserve Bank before he became Prime Minister of New Zealand, and he's head of the national government, who are meant to be the centre-right party. And he's really a businessman in charge, whose modus operandi seems to be selling off anything that he can get his hands on. So, and that's where the China connection comes in as well. Mm-hmm. We had a Meatworks sell recently to a Chinese company, and the workers went to work as they normally do one morning, and the doors were closed, and they had no jobs. And it was literally because there had been a handover, but the Chinese company had no intention of keeping it running smoothly, they were going to have some stand down time before they got their shit together. So John Key's become a very unpopular guy.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people are terrified that he's going to get in again, because he just seems to he's that classic representation of big business interests at the expense of the people. In terms of welfare, yes, we have a booming welfare industry, as far as I know. I remember there's a quote from a Maori lawyer from the 1920s or 30s that basically said that if the Labour government introduces welfare, which they were about to do, then it was going to be the downfall of the Maori culture. And in a lot of ways, I think that he was probably right. Again, it's that sort of thing that you could see, that you could relate to in terms of America.
Mm-hmm.
Big dependency.
I can confirm to you, by the way, that electricity production in New Zealand is 82% renewable. But obviously,
Right.
that's not all energy. That's usually what people make a mistake. They always say, "Oh, we have so much renewables," but renewables create electricity, and in terms of total share of energy, oil and gas and coal. Well, coal is small in New Zealand, but oil and gas are by very far the biggest consumption. So I don't know if you produce much oil and gas. But definitely you are, like most Western countries, very dependent. It's good that you have electricity, like in Switzerland, by hydroelectric. It's the biggest, but definitely you are dependent on oil and gas for. I don't know if you produce any, probably not very much, but it is definitely dependent on oil and gas imports. I can confirm that.
Okay.
Yeah, just so you can tell your friend.
Sure, I will.
Okay. So yes, the politics seems to so the debt must have happened somewhere. Could it be that you have a high defense? Have you been participating in the global war on terror like mad and spending a lot of money?
Yep, that's it. Yep, massive military we've got here, for sure. No, it's to be honest, it's not really my area. I'm more into the kind of like cultural side. I mean, I know that I went through the Christchurch earthquakes,
Yes.
and I mean the utter devastation of that city was just amazing, and the amount of debt that created in itself
When was that?
just,
What
was
was
just
it?
massive. That was 2000. Where were we? 2010.
Okay. Well, that could explain it. Yes.
Yeah, 2010 and 11. It created a lot of work at the same time, but apparently they still had to import Filipinos in to do a lot of that work.
Okay. Yeah, indeed. Military expenditure is only 1 point something of your GDP, so it's
Yeah.
very low. No, you were right to joke to make fun of me on that. Okay, no,
We did send some troops to Iraq. I do know that.
poor troops. Anyways, no. So indeed, yes. But just to mention that the debt is big. So interestingly, to see the evolution. Perhaps to go back on the way of life and if things go bad, are people are the people bonding between themselves? How is the social not the social life in terms of having fun and partying, but are people helping each other? Is there a culture of or is it completely hedonistic and individualistic?
it's not like Sweden, for example, where I hear that it is very individualistic in terms of, I mean, I know that it's collective at the same time in terms of political correctness, but New Zealanders do pride themselves on a kind of neighbourly approach where we all help each other out in our times of need, and we're kind of loose, come over for a barbie kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
In practice, in actual practice, people are really busy, working full-time jobs, raising families, on the daily grind, going to work, coming home.
Yeah.
Everybody's in their, in their house. The streets are empty. So it's an interesting question between the ideal and the actual practice. But there is that in the Kiwi psyche, there is that kind of collective, everybody mucking kind of thing. Interestingly, something that's been a big issue this year has been housing and homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say a big issue, I mean it's been a big issue in the media. The actuality of the situation, I can't actually comment on, but I do know what the narrative has been. And one narrative that's really kicked in is that maraes have been opening their doors. So a marae is a Maori meeting house. It's a cultural and social meeting point, kind of like a community centre would be for a European. But what they've been doing is they've been opening their doors. There have been a few that have been opening their doors to homeless people because they're sick of the supposed inaction of the government to provide housing and to actually deal with the homeless situation. So the narrative has been, closed government, evil government versus open-hearted Indigenous population, and that while and no doubt there is some truth to that, it's also kind of setting up this opposition between, and it ties back in with our history and the whole narrative of European colonization is that it's the harsh, individualistic, capitalist white man versus the open sort of socialist kind of almost communistic Maori culture who they're the true ones that take care of themselves. They're the ones who open their arms and welcome people in. So I've been watching that with a lot of interest, that whole narrative that's building up.
I see. So perhaps to finish on the you're an artist. On the artistic side, how are things in New Zealand? I mean, of course, the interaction between politics and in most countries, it's the government who funds artists and art, and I mean, you know that better than I. But how do you perceive that, and how your art is different from the mainstream?
Well, we're talking visual art here. On a broad sense, I think you get a lot of kudos if you, as an artist, go overseas and study or have some shows and then come back. It's that kind of, you've gone out into the big wide world kind of mentality, and you've sort of gleaned some of this international flavour and you've brought it back with you. The art scene in terms of, and I'll make a distinction here, there are sort of two types of art. One is a kind of production industry where people are painting landscapes and they're making commodities to sell, essentially. So you get craft, there's a lot of craft galleries here, where it's a kind of production line thing. People are trying to make a living off of selling paintings in small craft galleries, for example. What I'm talking about, to get very pretentious, is the more avant-garde practice, which is the, say, for example, people go to university and they learn about art history and about avant-garde practice and about where things are today, and then they leave art school and they engage in that world, the contemporary art world. That's what I'm talking about. And I think New Zealand is a lot like the rest, that world, New Zealand is a lot like the rest of the world, in that, I mean, this is a really big subject, but to try and paint it with broad strokes, art really reflects this kind of all-inclusive, multi-cult, sort of anti-West, anti-capitalist model that seems to be so popular today amongst the left.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way that manifests in art, for example, I mean, it manifests in many different ways, but one of the ways that manifests is this kind of is viewer participation, for example, where the role of the artist has just become a kind of facilitator.
Mm-hmm.
What the artist does is makes connections. So the idea of the authoritarian artist, who's the genius, who makes works of art and then displays them for the public to be in awe of, has become, I think, associated with fascism, for example. So we must move as far away from authoritarianism and hierarchy as possible. The artist gets torn down to the same level as the viewer and becomes simply a facilitator. So, for example, someone's work of art might be that they have a desk and people can come up, public can come up, and they can bank a skill, and then that skill can be traded in with someone else, and so they're connecting people who they're connecting someone who wants something with someone who can provide something. To me, it's just really thin, and it's blurred the line so much between just the kind of community market and art that I don't really see that there's any art left. What I'm interested in now, and I'm only just transitioning into this, I'm about to have an exhibition in 3 weeks. I'm having 2 exhibitions, and I'm really interested in authoritarian aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wanting to work from my position that I found myself in when I became aware of, say, the alt-right, of working in a contemporary art practice, and I want to move the other way from where the art world's going. I want to work my way out of where they are.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to just dislocate it. So I'm really interested in this kind of hierarchical, strong aesthetic. For example, let me just give you a quick example. Recently, we had our flag referendum in New Zealand, where our Prime Minister proposed that we change the historic flag, which is the Union Jack and 4 stars for the Southern Cross. And this is really about a kind of throwing out of our evil history. So the public got to submit designs, and all of those designs that got shortlisted, none of them had the Union Jack. None of them had the British history.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them kept the Southern Cross, the 4 stars, because that's our location in terms of the Pacific. But all of them threw out the Union Jack, except one that kind of made these swirly Maori designs on them, which was just terrible. And I was looking at them the other day. I went back and had a look at them, and they were all just really limp. All of the designs were kind of either new agey or just, they didn't have any assertiveness or authoritarianism, in terms of when you look at historic flags from different nations, they are bold and they are strong and they are assertive and they are nationalistic. It's in the aesthetic and it's beautiful. I love it. So my new series of work is actually taking the Union Jack itself and making a series of work from that aesthetic. And just to put it simply, all I hope to do is that the presence of the exhibition has a very strong, assertive, historic feel to it, while still walking in the contemporary art field.
I see. Actually, I'm seeing right now the different flags they suggested. Um, yeah, it's weird. Some or at least it's original. I've never seen flags like that.
Well, of course you haven't, because flags were in general were invented in a different era where this kind of I'd just say a pre-1960s era, basically, where traditionalism was important, where the traditional values were central to the successful running of a European society, and it's reflected in the aesthetic of the flag.
Uh-huh.
And I think that those new flag designs, they really reflect a kind of fracturing and a pluralism and a loss of tradition to this kind of thin, new, global kind of culture mixed with a bit of indigenous that is just really thin and flat. And to me, it just reeks of a loss of identity.
I see. What's your blog? Where people can learn more about you and read or listen to your point of view. What's your blog address?
The blog address is ToughLoveLetters.wordpress.com. That's ToughLoveLetters, all one word, .wordpress.com. And everything's on there. There's an email address on there. There's links to other podcasts that I've been on and articles that I've posted. I've been posting articles on Red Ice Radio related to current events in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's really the one-stop shop. I'm going to, at the moment, in terms of being an artist, I practice under my given name. And so it's an interesting question when it comes to that I just, for the blog, I go under the pseudonym. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to post, I'm just going to link to my Facebook page to my artist Facebook page when I post all the images for the exhibitions. I'm just going to put a link on my Tough Love Letters blog, and anyone who makes the connection deserves to know who's who. So,
okay, I forgot to ask you one question. I have a lot of friends who used to live in South Africa, and during the 90s and 2000, there was this brain drain, and a lot of them left for fear of the criminality and lack of opportunities for white South Africans in South Africa. And a lot of them moved to New Zealand. And these people are pretty tough. They're not they're not necessarily politically correct. They're not necessarily people, I think they're very nice people, but they don't accept anything. Do you see them in South Africa influencing things or bringing a more, let's say, manly behavior, or not so much?
Do I see South Africans over here?
Yeah.
I don't really. I meet the occasional one or two, but I'm not sure whether they're congregating up in Auckland or not. All I could really say is that my mum, her local librarian, is South African, and he basically just talks about how South Africa's just gone to ruin since the government changed hands. But no, there's not in my sphere. There's not a huge South African presence.
Okay, okay. Maybe they're in the Southern Island. It's possible.
Look, they might be. Yeah, you know, you, in terms of the news, for example, you hear a lot of advocation from minority groups. Now, you could say that South Africans are a minority group, but what I mean is clearly minority groups, non-white groups. The South African community, if there is one, isn't vocal in terms of in the media. I mean, they're not jumping on to councils and advocating for South African rights in New Zealand. They're not slamming the police for being racist. You know, they're just getting on with it as far as I know. You know, I mean, you just don't hear. So, and in terms of my personal life, I don't really meet many. So,
okay, I see. Now, you're going to expose and your artwork and your blog. I will put the link to your blog on the description of the video here. Very interesting blog. You are doing this under a nickname, as I am. Is there a reason you want to be anonymous, or is it just to make two activities separate?
well, when I started the blog, I wasn't sure actually what I was going to put on there. I knew that it was going to be of a European focus in terms of European New Zealander, but I didn't know where it was going to go. And at the time that I started it, I was listening to a lot of sort of alt-right podcasts and things, and pretty much everyone's going by a pseudonym. And I just thought, I'll start it with that, and I'll just play it safe and see how it goes, because I don't actually know what's going to happen, who's going to contact me, what I'm actually, you know, where the blog itself is actually going to go. And so it was really just a precaution. The stuff that I put on there, some of it is just personal musings, and some of it, and quite a bit of it is like analysis of what's going on in the media. And it is, because New Zealand is a very politically correct place, a lot of the stuff that I say, I wouldn't want at this stage, I wouldn't discuss it with my friends and family unless I knew that they were sympathetic. So there are people who I know that I can open up to and they'll be sympathetic. But like, for example, my sister works in a very sensitive field in terms of her career. And I mean, I don't think that it's going to happen because I'm not like prominent or anything, but I wouldn't want to put her in jeopardy in terms of her career. So at this stage, I'm just keeping it separate. In terms of the art world, that's a really interesting one. Is that I've got work that I want to make that's sort of pretty full on, you know, sort of full 1488 stuff, and I know that if I made that work at this stage, you know, and then I want to go and get an exhibition somewhere else, and I say, hey, go check out my Facebook page, and this work's on there. It's really going to limit my options. And on the one hand, I just want to do it, but on the other hand, I want to work my way from where I am. So my practice pre-red pilling, I want to take that through a series of steps through exhibitions to work my way into the right. I don't want to just actually sever the ties, because in terms of the art world, I think that I've got work to do in the art world. At one point, like actually quite recently, at one point I didn't think that I did, but I realize now that I do. And maybe on my way I can take people with me. So it is really hard in terms of, because I want people who I communicate with, like you and other people on the internet, to know what artwork I'm making, and I want to put it on my blog. So I do figure that kind of the halfway thing is to put it on there, link it, and if anyone makes the connection, whatever, that's fine.
Okay, no, I think you're right. I think it's very wise and you're right to have this approach. Well, look, thank you very much. I will put the link to your blog on the description, and maybe we'll meet one day in New Zealand or elsewhere.
Yeah, that's right. When the world collapses and people just flood into New Zealand, it's going to become like the highest density population in the world. Yep.
Well, yes, I need to get a fake Syrian passport to be sure to get priority if I ever have to come in.
You'll be in.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and happy trails down under.
Thank you, Piero. It's been a pleasure.